Fantasy is the imagination which gives credence to fantasy films. These type of films have fantastic themes that most of the time involve magic, medieval settings, wizards, magical and make-believe creatures, and other elements like adventure and romance, other worlds and realms, and sometimes supernatural type of events. They're richly developed fantasy worlds. Some may be more character-oriented and complex, and they feature a hero of humble beginnings with a clear distinction between good and evil set against each other in an epic struggle. They can even overlap into other genres like science fiction and horror, but they still manage to stay distinct. But underneath the term fantasy, there are many types of subgenres like superhero films, fairy tale films, high fantasy, and sword and sorcery, and another subgenre of fantasy films like contemporary fantasy and films with live action animation. Hi, I'm Lisa Stevens, a digital cinematography major here at Full Sail University, and I'd like to explore the evolution of the fantasy film in the motion picture industry. Fantasy films have always been a favorite of both adults and children alike. Fantasy films have a history that is almost as old as film itself. However, they were relatively few and far between, and in the beginning, they were never highly regarded in the film industry like the other genres of science fiction and horror. They suffered with poor production values, poor special effects, and over-the-top bad acting. Then in the 1980s, when the high-tech filmmaking techniques were developed, there was an increased audience interest, and the genre really began to flourish. Fantasy films got their start in 1902 with a silent film from George Méliès, A Trip to the Moon. As technology advanced in the 30s, later some of these silent films were eventually remade into sound pictures, like King Kong, The Mummy, and Topper, but most notably was the 1939 release of The Wizard of Oz that had no longer sound but color. In the 40s, we saw colorized fantasy films like The Thief of Baghdad, The Jungle Book, and Beauty and the Beast. In the 50s, we saw Darby O'Gill and the Little People, Scrooge, and the animated Alice in Wonderland. The 60s, we saw Jules Verne's Mysterious Island and Ton of Bees movies, and the 60s saw the release of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. In the 70s, we saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Oh God, Heaven Can Wait, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and Willy Wonka and Chocolate Factory. In the 80s, there were films like the Indiana Jones films, Excalibur, Legend, Conan the Barbarian, The Princess Bride, Big Trouble in Little China, Highlander, The Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, and the Back to the Future films. In the 90s, there were films such as Bram Stoker's Dracula, Edward Scissorhands, Groundhog Day, Hook, and Dragonheart. The year 2000 saw films like The Brothers Grimm, The Chronicles of Narnia, Enchanted, Aragon, Harry Potter films, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and the Lord of the Rings series, Monsters, Inc., Pirates of the Caribbean films, Shrek films, Twilight Saga, Underworld series, and Watchmen. In the 2010 decade, we saw films like Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, Alice in Wonderland, Clash of the Titan films, Dark Shadows, Gulliver's Travels, Immortals, Oz the Great and Powerful, the Percy Jackson, the Olympian films, Snow White and the Huntsman, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, The Hobbit, Thor, and Thor 2. And these are just a few of how these films have actually gone through